So this is part 2 of the 934 build. As you can see, I got all the paint stripped off, or at least most of it. What you might not be able to see from this video is there was actually a coat of white primer on the car, which obviously I laid down first. Not all of that has come off, but that should sand off pretty easily, or I can work it in. A couple things I noticed after I got the paint off was there's a crack in the hood right about here, or the roof rather. Must have happened before I painted it, so probably in transit somewhere at some point, as well as here on the cowl. There's even body filler in there to level it out, so I'm gonna have to go back and fix all that again. The problem is right here in this section of the cowl, the windshield isn't going to fit quite right. I actually did a restoration on a real 911 once. I had the same problem. I was involved in a wreck and the cowl got bent in this area here, and the windshield wouldn't go back in. The owner of the car bought the car that way. We didn't know. We actually broke 2 windshields trying to get it in the car before we figured it out. And so the crack in the vent piece here, we're actually going to cut out these vent pieces and put in some real screen behind it, because you know that's a good detail that needs to be improved upon. I did let this sit in Purple Power or similar product to strip some of this paint off. It worked a little bit. You know, this red base paint here is having a hard time coming off, but it tended to soften up the plastic, which caused a hinge to break. That's why the door doesn't close right now. So one more thing I gotta fix. And I guess in my infinite wisdom and misspent youth, I managed to shave off the drip rail on the roof line, so I've got to go back and put that back in. I bought some thin styrene strips. It actually bends really nice. It will bend the way I need it to make that work. So I'm going to see that here in not too distant future. The on the front clip section here, I actually rounded off the edges of the fenders and puttied in the seam line for the flares to make it look more like a 930. And now I get to go back and undo that. I've actually got another hood, but I decided to salvage this one. Why waste parts if you don't have to? So what I did here was put a little styrene strip in here. Let me see, like this, 1/2 millimeter in diameter or something like that. Put it on the edge, smoothed it out, got the shape, and then used a little JB weld as filler, and then now I'm smoothing that back out. But getting the definition back in this line was kind of a little tricky. Still working on it. And one of the things neglected from the kit, from the original moldings, was these actually had little screws that held this on. So I've got to go back and figure out a way to replicate that. It'll be a nice little detail. I painted the shocks Bilstein green, which is actually Tamiya color called Park Green. And I don't know if you can see it. We'll get up here in the magnifying glass. But I've added nuts. The original car had nuts that would hold that to the ball joint. And what I'm doing there is this company, Top Studio, makes a lot of very, very small hardware. I mean, really, really small stuff. You can see this has got a head diameter on the nut of about 1 millimeter, which is the equivalent of about a 13 millimeter nut at 1/12 scale. It's not actually a nut and bolt arrangement. It's what they call a rivet. It just means it's not threaded. But they make them, a bunch of them, down to, like, this one's a bolt at 0.7, and they make it down to, I think, 0.5 millimeters, half a millimeter. And somewhere around here is a brake caliper, which I'm working on. I made the crossover line that goes on the bottom of the brake caliper. Let's try this in the magnifying glass again. It's not too hard to do. And added the bleed nipples. There's one on each side on these calipers. And probably can't see it, but I drilled another hole for the brake line to go in. The nipples, again, another one of these things that are available from Top Studio. Problem is, these things are, well, they're not exactly cheap and or easy to find. Pretty much been finding this stuff on eBay, and it's coming from pretty much all over the world because nobody has everything that you need, basically. Another one of the things I'm working on, the fuel distributor, which was around here a minute ago. There it is. This car has CIS fuel injection, which uses a fuel distributor, and the let's see if I can get better on that. And the detail in the kit originally really wasn't that good. So once again, we refer to Top Studio, who makes these banjo fitting kits. The head of the bolt on that is, you know, something like a millimeter or something. But it's a really nice detail. And on the real fuel distributors, at each port there's a short fitting, but on the center port there's a long fitting. It's actually like a 12 millimeter wrench size to get the fitting off. Can't quite get that much detail, but it is longer. And on this car, you'll notice that there's 8 ports for the fuel fittings, but this is only a 6-cylinder car, and my guess is they probably used a fuel distributor off of like a Mercedes V8 engine or something, or maybe even something like a 928, which would have had a 8-port fuel distributor. And they basically just put bolts to cap off the 2 that they didn't use. Anyway, in the kit, I ran out of parts, so I have to order another kit to finish that job. And another thing I'm working on, it's missing anyway. Find it later. But anyway, that's where we are updated on this so far. The rear shocks, I actually remade the lower part of the rear shocks out of aluminum. Again, painted Bilstein green. I don't like the Phillips head screws that the kit originally comes with, so I'm gonna get a scale hex head bolt, which should be something like about 1.5 millimeter head, to simulate the 22 millimeter bolt that originally would have held the shock on the bottom. And not real happy about the nuts they used on the top. That's pretty big. That's like way out of scale. So I'm going to look for a nut that has a smaller head on it. Also, there's a lot of other details to sort out with that too. They really kind of phoned it in on that one. And on the engine, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I remade the oil return tubes on the bottom out of brass. It's actually, each piece is actually 2 pieces. The kit's not really all that detailed that well on the bottom, but I also added this little nut down here, which simulates one of the oil pressure valves on this motor. I'm probably going to redo these nuts on the bottom, which would be somewhere around a 0.7 or a 0.8 millimeter. They didn't do a very good job in this casting, so there's going to have to be some cleanup and fixing on that. And there's actually supposed to be a nut here that's missing, which clamps down the intermediate shaft, and there should be a nut on each of these stubs here. They didn't put that in the casting, so I'm going to add those two. And I'm going to run a clutch cable on here. The only thing is, they actually made the end of the clutch lever incorrectly. I'm just going to go with it, but